The culture of anime conventions has changed. I think we can all agree on that. But I don't think that change is necessarily a bad thing. Let me explain. Anyone who's been to an anime convention before 2020 and after 2020 can tell you that the crowds are crowding. The number of people going to the more well-known, larger anime conventions have just about doubled depending on the con. And we can all tell. But there's more to the changes at conventions than just sheer crowding. Anime conventions are something that I hold near and dear to my heart, and I think to truly talk about how the culture of conventions has changed, we have to put things into context, because anime conventions didn't just pop up out of nowhere in the 90s. Anime conventions in the US specifically have a pretty rich history dating back to sci-fi fan conventions. The first major convention being Worldcon in 1939, put on by the World Science Fiction Society. Fun fact, this convention is actually still held annually, and in 2025 there were a total of 8,667 attendees from across the world, both in person and virtually attending. There was also the Philadelphia Science Fiction Conference in 1936 with 9 attendees. It was apparently the first ever sci-fi convention, or at least the first meetup to call themselves a convention, but it's not really what we would call a convention today. But speaking of sci-fi, most agree that modern fandoms and even cosplay have roots in these early sci-fi fan communities. Anyway, these early fan conventions were events where fans would connect with one another in person and watch sci-fi movies or have speeches, almost mimicking a political convention, which is where the term convention comes from. Some of the earliest examples of a sci-fi fan convention would not be called a convention by today's standards, but just people meeting up together, more akin to hanging out with friends or having a club meeting. As fans began to meet up more and more and organize more meetups, we eventually come to larger events closer to what we are used to today. Worldcon in 1939 was the first 3-day convention, which is now pretty standard, with most conventions in the US being either a Friday-Saturday thing, or a Friday through Sunday, or a Thursday through Sunday. With at least 150 confirmed attendees, Worldcon 1939 set the template for conventions running forward. Organized programming, convention badges, and even badge ribbons. Badge ribbons are notable for anime conventions because they've kind of become a lot more popular in recent years, at least in Atlanta conventions. I can't speak for all places, but I do know in Atlanta, a lot of anime conventions picking up these badge ribbons are probably influenced by Dragon Con, which is a big general pop culture, comics, sci-fi, whatever anime convention in Atlanta, and badge ribbons have been a huge part of Dragon Con culture for a very, very long time. So in my local community, it feels like that sci-fi, whatever, coming back into it again, and I just think that's neat and worth mentioning. Costumes, industry guests, a whole event that was just a little bit more than hanging out with other fans for a day or two. Not quite the collection of panels that we would see today, but there was one panel room at the first Worldcon. It was actually when Star Trek got big and started taking over sci-fi conventions that conventions started doing more than one panel at a time. Worldcon also had LineCon, a rite of passage, the biggest annoyance, and the biggest point of criticism for most larger anime conventions, and this has been true at least since the 2010s. I remember when I first started getting into anime conventions and seeing things about conventions online, Anime Expo was already coming under fire for people waiting in line for over 4 to 5 hours, and a line that stretched down the street from the convention center. It's also speculated that Worldcon may have been the first hotel model convention, which basically just means that the convention is held in a hotel. This is something that many anime conventions started as before growing to fit a convention center. Most of your 90s and 2000s anime conventions, if they weren't held on a college campus, they were held in a hotel. I do want to specify this does not include sites like Anime Weekend Atlanta in the Cop Galleria or Katsucon in the Gaylord, since those are technically held at hotels, but the hotels are also convention centers. It's not your standard hotel. I do think it's similar though, because the hotel is a big part of the culture of the convention, even though it's more than just a hotel. I see this a lot with Anime Weekend Atlanta since it's had a venue change over the past couple of years, and a lot of people say the convention doesn't feel the same because it's no longer at this hotel and convention center that it used to be at. These hotel convention centers, like the Gaylord and the Waverly Cobb Galleria, are typically smaller than, say, a larger convention center like the Georgia World Congress Center. And I do want to say these venues that are hotel convention centers combined, like the Waverly and the Gaylord, they're different from conventions like MomoCon at the Georgia World Congress Center because despite some of the events for the con being held in the Omni Hotel, which is the host hotel connected to the convention center, the hotel is not built into the culture of the convention, if that makes sense. Back to convention history though, New York Comic Con, the first comic convention, is the first time we see an artist alley in the form of professional comic artists and an exhibitor hall in the form of vendors selling comics. Because before, conventions were just about hanging out, not really about buying merchandise. It can also be said that Artist Alley as a fan art and self-produced works were heavily influenced by doujinshi markets in Japan, and Comiket would go on to inspire the first anime conventions. I remember thinking Comiket was an anime convention because I would see so many pictures of people cosplaying there. It's literally just people selling doujins, whether it be fan works of popular series or completely original works, which is really cool. There's not really a culture around that in the US, but very, very recently, as of the time of making this video, like a couple weeks ago, there was a doujin event in the US that went really well, so hopefully we'll start to see more of that kind of thing in the future. The first anime conventions in the US were born in a community that relied on piracy and knowing a guy who knew a guy in order to get a VHS with fan subs either embedded into it or on paper to follow along. Anime had aired on TV in some places on the West Coast primarily, and some series like Astro Boy did see widespread syndication on American television. But most fans were relying on bootleg copies being distributed by other fans and fan organizations like the Cartoon Fantasy Organization. Early fan communities congregated in groups to watch anime together in places like college campuses, mirroring the predecessors to sci-fi conventions, where it was just people hanging out and watching things together. Also, AMVs, anime music videos for those who don't know, we've been making cool edits of anime scenes to music since at least 1982, with Jim Kapaztas, sorry if I said that wrong, being credited as the guy to first make an AMV, and I guess he is the reason that I can now go sit in a cool dark room and watch AMVs at an anime convention. Anime Weekend Atlanta specifically has a video art track playing AMVs the entire con, which is always like a really fun way to go decompress. While anime had been present at sci-fi conventions, in 1983 we see one of the first dedicated anime conventions pop up, YamatoCon in Dallas, Texas. This convention was a one-day event and included programming like watching the first 26 episodes of Star Blazers, an American adaptation of Space Battleship Yamato, and a dealer's room. This convention was primarily geared towards Space Battleship Yamato and Star Blazers, so the main selling point was just watching the show with other fans. Also worth mentioning, during this time period, shows were typically not accessible outside of when they aired on TV, and VCRs with blank VHS tapes were expensive, so if you were going to record from your TV, it was not something super accessible to the everyday person unless they had a lot of money. So viewing events like this were special, and for the whopping cost of $2, and to put it into perspective, $2 in 1983 would go as far as just under $7 goes in 2026. which is still insanely cheap for an event like this. I'd wager if you did something like this today, it would cost at least $20 to $30 per person, which still isn't a lot compared to the typical $100 cons, but the difference is definitely there. There were about 100 people at the first YamatoCon, and at that time, that was really good for a convention, especially a convention on its first ever run. The biggest comic conventions at that time only got a few thousand, with most getting a few hundred, apparently, and prior to YamatoCon, you'd see other many events pop up across the US, also celebrating Star Blazers, where fans would watch the show or the Yamato movies and talk about the series or other things related. So it seems like Star Blazers was really, really popular, and that makes sense. If these sorts of events and conventions were born out of the sci-fi community, it makes sense that the first Anime Con would also be about a sci-fi anime. In 1990, we saw Project A-Con come onto the scene and claim to be the first anime convention ever. This has been disputed, but they were probably among the first more general anime con, who knows? People back then probably knew. Also located in Texas, Project A-Con had a staggering 380 attendees, and this is a convention that continued for decades. While A-Con was canceled in 2025 due to funding issues, they haven't officially closed doors yet and are still hoping to have a comeback either this year or next year. Although, as far as I can tell, there's not been any news on that, so they might be dead, but they might not be. And in 1991, we got Anime Con, which was the first anime convention to get over 1,000 attendees. It was also the first to see significant industry guests, even being sponsored by animation studios like Gainax, which, if you don't know, is the animation studio responsible for Neon Genesis Evangelion, which would come out a few years after this convention. In 1992, many of the original staff for AnimeCon created Anime Expo, which is still ongoing to this day and is the largest anime convention in North America, possibly even the largest outside of Japan, with an estimated over 400,000 attendees in 2025. Anime Expo is a bit special since it's got a very, very strong industry presence, with many anime studios from Japan announcing new anime at Anime Expo. Black Butler Season 4 was announced out of the blue at Anime Expo in 2023, and we're hoping to see something similar this year with a Season 6 announcement. But needless to say, your average anime convention in the US is not going to be Anime Expo. As more and more anime conventions popped up over the course of the 90s and the early 2000s, we saw anime conventions become what you'd expect from a small convention nowadays. Industry guests like voice actors, production studios, and mangaka, but primarily English voice actors, vendors selling a plethora of anime merch and related fan merch, fan artists selling prints and handmade goods, and during this time, it was more common to see laminated keychains, can buttons, something that you could easily make at home, while enamel pens and acrylic keychains are something that got more popular during the very, very late 2010s, like 2018, 2019, maybe slightly before, but definitely took over Artist Alley post-COVID. We also retained a lot of what original fan conventions were in these early anime conventions. Watch parties, viewings of anime, costumes that at the time were primarily handmade, small, passionate fan communities. Anime conventions were niche, seeing several hundred or maybe a couple thousand attendees at first, and some even reaching a few thousand as we moved into the early 2000s. Anime Expo didn't hit 10,000 attendees until 2001, where 13,000 people were there. And while that is big, that's kind of nothing compared to the numbers we see today. Conventions were a much smaller community, and people felt that community. Liking anime was strange and weird, so it was extra special to find someone who also liked the weird thing that you liked and were possibly bullied for liking. I know that's something people say a lot about growing up in the 2000s. I will say, by the time I started liking anime, I don't really think people were getting bullied for it, or maybe my school was just special. I was never bullied for liking anime. Most of my friend group could also say the same. So maybe I'm like right at that cusp where it started to change. My friends who started going to anime conventions in the 2000s often talk about how it felt easier to connect with others on the broad interest of anime and manga. There weren't as many new shows coming out in any given season, and even less easily available in English. So there was a pretty strong chance that most people at an anime convention had seen and even liked all of the same shows. At least within certain age demographics. I'd argue many fans who were kids in the 2000s were mostly watching anime via 4Kids and Toonami, and whatever they could find on YouTube. Maybe if they were lucky, they would know about illegal streaming websites and expand their horizons, but I did crash the family computer trying to watch Vampire Knight in middle school, so there was that skill issue to overcome. But the sense of community made it easier to overcome any social barriers. People treated one another like friends despite having never met before because they're at an anime convention. I'd honestly say this is still true today, at least for me. Anime conventions have always had a way of breaking through my more antisocial and awkward tendencies, making it easier to randomly approach people and start a conversation. I really can't explain the magic specifically that causes this, but it does help when a conversation can easily start with, "OMG, I love your cosplay of insert favorite character here." And I also kind of go into this with the assumption that most people at cons have the same awkwardness that I do, and I know a lot of people that go to cons are also neurodivergent, which helps a lot, at least for me. It's during this initial growth of anime conventions in the 90s and 2000s that my local conventions I attend almost every year became a thing. Anime Weekend Atlanta held its first 3-day event in October of 1995 and was hosted in various hotels around Atlanta or the Atlanta area until landing at the Waverly and Cobb Galleria in 2003, where it stayed until moving to the Georgia World Congress Center in 2024. A decade after Awa was born, MomoCon came into existence on the Georgia Tech campus in 2005, where it was held until moving entirely to the Marriott Marquis in 2012, one of the hotels that host DragonCon, by the way. It might be the main one, I'm not sure. And then moving to the Georgia World Congress Center in 2015. Since these conventions are the two I've been going to regularly since 2016, they will be my main drawing points for how conventions have grown and changed. They're also pretty huge, with MomoCon seeing over 67,000 people this year in 2026, which was a pretty big jump from the 59,000 the year before and the 39,000 attendees we saw in 2019 before COVID. So it seems like a prime example to look at how conventions have blown up and changed recently. But back to the 2000s, what was your typical anime convention even like?
Okay, my first convention was in September of 2005. It was at Anime Fest in Dallas, Texas.
In 2005, it was my first anime convention called JCon in Orlando.
My first anime convention was right after I graduated high school. It was Anime Expo 2010.
My first con that I ever went to was MegaCon 2011. It was literally a life changer.
It was the first time I cosplayed, for sure. That's the main memory. Like, my mom helped me make a costume for Genjo Sanzo from Sayuki.
I also took with me a disposable camera. I was very excited. I took with me a disposable camera to take pictures of like cosplayers and stuff. It was very homegrown, and there weren't that many people there. It took place in a hotel, and I remember it being very chill. There wasn't like huge crowds of people like at all. It felt really like intimate almost.
We were dressed up as our Sayuki characters, just heading upstairs for something, and we were on the escalator heading up, and at the same time we're heading up, a man came up to the top of the other escalator, was coming down, and he looked at us and he said, "Oh my God, I love your costumes." And as he's talking to us, like, I know this voice. I've heard this voice before. And it turns out, like, my friend like kind of like grabs me like, "That was Greg Ayers." And I'm just like, "Oh, crap." And so we went up the escalator and immediately came around and went down the escalator to follow him. And she was able to get something signed that was something he did that she had signed, but I only had like a volume 1 of Hanakimi in my hand, so it was just like, here, can you sign this for me? So Greg Ayers signed a random volume of Hanakimi, even though it has nothing to do with the anime or the manga. So that was a core memory for me.
I got to go up on stage with Masakazu Morito, who's the voice of Ichigo, got to do a whole panel with that. I got to meet so many cool friends, part of the fighting game community, and gosh, so many cosplayers, and it really wanted to get into cosplaying because of it. I mean, there's so much there to do, and I just felt so happy to be there. You know, just like a whole new world opened up for me that day.
In a first exposure to a world that I didn't realize was going to be so important to me as I went through, the rest of high school into college. I've made so many friends through, cosplay and the con scene, and to be able to, walk around my very first con and, I got to meet a couple of voice actors. This was when autographs were still free, but, I got to meet a couple of voice actors, which was incredible. And, just looking at all of the merch that was available that I'd never seen before, it was literally an experience that I will remember forever.
Your typical anime convention, once upon a time, would be a small-ish community event where fans can meet up and hang out, watch anime in AMVs, wear costumes, perform even, yap it up in panels talking about Japanese media, or even pretending to be characters and play games, meet industry guests, and autographs were free back then, buy goods imported from Japan, even snacks that you can now get at your average grocery store today were once rare con goodies at one point. You could buy fan art, be cringe, make new friends. Honestly, when you list it out like that, the basics of a convention haven't really seemed to change all that much. So what the hell are we even talking about in this video and when we say conventions have changed?
There is a contrast between then and now. Like, cosplay is like the main thing that I could think of that has changed.
I feel like it's more mainstream than when I grew up with it. I used to get bullied, all right? I used to get bullied for liking anime. I mean, a lot of people did back in the 2000s, but nowadays it's more widely accepted. And if I see friends say, oh, I used to like Dragon Ball Z when I was little. No, you did not.
A bigger influx of people that didn't have to fight for their life to watch Naruto episode 7 in 6 different parts on YouTube.
And people would have no wigs. I know wigs are mentioned a lot, but there were absolutely no wigs that I could see. And those that were from like costume shops. So they were, the plastic, shiny ones.
I feel like a lot of the games that are also put out nowadays definitely, bring that wider audience into the anime scene as well. Most of the games like Umamusume, Honkai Star Rail, stuff like that, yada, yada, yada.
Also, like the vendors hall, there used to not be like exhibitors and stuff like that. There used to be just like a single room, and there would be, like back at JCon, I remember, it was just one room, and there was probably maybe 20 tables in there, and Artist Alley wasn't a thing either. People didn't really sell their wares, and if they did, they were like sitting like on the floor with like a poster, like I'll do commissions and drawings for X amount of money. So I've seen stuff like that.
I remember people had DDR in the hotel lobby, and there would just be people that were walking by and stop and just crowd around and take turns playing DDR in the hotel lobby.
AWA was like one of my favorites because it was in 2 places. It was in a hotel and it was in the Cobb Galleria. The hotel, while it was huge, still had a lot more room space for you to walk around, and it was more, I would say more based on community, because everybody was out and about late at night, everybody was having a good time dancing around. I don't usually get that anymore. MomoCon is definitely a great place. I do love the 24-hour arcade. I love staying up. I love hanging out with people. I love the courtyard. I just miss the little smaller spaces in general.
Was in line for something, and the girl sitting around me had a deck of cards, and we just started playing cards. We didn't know a thing about each other. We just started playing cards.
It's definitely more inclusive now than it used to be, but also like it feels like it's very cliquey now as well. Like used to, like anime used to be so niche that if you knew somebody that liked anime, you're like, oh my gosh, like you actually like that. And now it's just like, oh, you like anime? It's like, oh, you like that one? That's weird. You know what I mean? And it's like, as opposed to being like, oh, we like the same thing, So we have so much in common, like, already, because it's so it's so underground and people don't talk about it anymore. You just felt like you kind of made a friend, but now it's like everybody watches anime, so you kind of lose that that intimacy that the culture used to have, I feel.
I do remember the yaoi panels. I remember that was a thing. Like, I remember seeing them, like, strung up in the booths. I remember, there was one time a group of people, like, all of them had a yaoi panel in hand as they passed me. I did not see anyone get hit. They always just had them on hand, and, like, the most I saw was, like, holding it and, like, shaking, like, oh my god, I got one.
Honestly, I feel like a lot of the con culture might be the same, or a lot of things are the same.
The general layout of a convention feels the same to me as it did 20 years ago. I do remember, like, I know culture is mentioned a lot when you talk about other people's opinions of convention culture. I know glomping was a thing. I kind of miss the camaraderie whenever you, if you were by yourself, it was a little bit easier to approach people to start conversations.
And I might be stealing a little bit of Ruthie's answer, because I agreed with them, like 100%, is that a lot of the people have changed. What's trending usually has, reflected how the culture of the crowd is technically. The baseline for what can be considered cosplay has lowered, which makes the barrier for entry to cosplay at cons much more accessible, which I think is great, because I love cosplay and I want everybody to keep doing it. But it can be also spun in a negative way sometimes, because I think we're entering a social kind of place where a lot of the time there's, like, a morality, like, superiority, for behaving certain ways, or, inhabiting certain characters. But the biggest thing I've seen is post-COVID, the people that are going to cons for the first time aren't as educated on etiquette a lot of the time, so the temperature of, like, crowds in general can be a bit hit or miss.
If you ask anyone who's been going to conventions since before social media, they all point to social media for being a big factor in a cultural shift at anime conventions. And sure, social media did bring more eyes onto anime and conventions. I mean, social media exposed many of us to cosplay. I became interested in cosplay and anime conventions through YouTube videos and vlogs and Instagram. And more people started creating content at anime conventions. Vlogs, skits, photo shoots, you name it. If it could be posted online, it was made at cons. And during the 2010s, in cosplay communities specifically, it was becoming more of a thing to make up little skit ideas and basically act it out in character, or even make cosplay music videos, and a lot of these were being filmed at conventions because that's when most people were able to be with their cosplay friends, or it was a designated space to cosplay. And with most conventions being held at a hotel, maybe you had a nicer backdrop to film in than you would have at home. So while this social media aspect did create a bit of a rat race amongst the cosplay community specifically, I don't think conventions changed for the worse because of it. The vast majority of content creation is done for fun, especially back then. While the idea of being a professional cosplayer was around, it was new, and a lot of people weren't really sure what that would look like beyond getting paid to do promos for companies at conventions, or even guesting as a convention cosplayer if you were special like Yaya Han. Cosplayers as convention guests have been a thing since before I started going to cons, but they seem to be a bigger deal now. And as we move through the 2010s, because these cosplayers were no longer just really talented crafters, they were also niche internet micro-celebrities. Influencers and creators who had built a dedicated following around their cosplays, maybe tutorials if they crafted things, and their charming personalities. While cosplay isn't the end-all be-all of anime conventions, it is a huge way many of us interact with cons and the community, and it does play a role in the greater anime convention ecosystem. Cosplay has absolutely changed a ton, even since I got into cosplay in 2014. It's easier now more than ever for anyone to get a decently made and affordable costume just by buying a mass-produced one from a reputable store online. The barrier to entry is lower now than ever before, with a more polished look even for beginners. This also gives cosplayers the chance to lean more into other skills, like wig styling or wig building. Helmet wigs were not common a decade ago, and the nice, lightly styled wigs most of us were wearing a decade ago were absolutely not a thing 20 years ago. This video isn't a history of cosplay video though, so we'll stop there. Just know that cosplay as a hobby has changed so much over the past decade or 20 years. It's a almost completely different landscape with a lot more resources, tutorials, just more things for people to lean on to create really intricate and well-made costumes. And even if you're not interested in crafting, you are able to purchase really intricate and mostly well-made costumes. For anime conventions specifically though, the cosplay community has grown a lot online over the past several years, and that brings more people into the convention space, and also puts more of a spotlight on this weird costuming hobby that's secretly 10 different hobbies in one. And some conventions have really shown their love for cosplay, putting more of an effort into cosplay-related programming and hosting well-run contests. And I know it was kind of a thing that a lot of people who got into cosplay during COVID lockdowns had never been to conventions. So this is a new large group of people that are going to cons for the first time or adding to that new con goer pool that has made conventions way more crowded than they used to be. And I'm not saying this is necessarily a bad thing. I'm just saying this is another avenue that a lot of people became interested in conventions over the past few years. But as for cultural shifts at large, I've heard it be said that during the 2010s, there seemed to be a growing acceptance of minorities. Gender-neutral bathrooms, a cosplay culture of cross-dressing and gender bending and exploring gender expression brings more acceptance or maybe lack of care when it comes to transgender and non-binary people going to conventions. And when I say lack of care, I mostly mean people are not policing who goes into what bathroom. Because, I mean, when half of the attendees are in cosplays that don't match their assigned gender at birth or even the gender they identify with, how are you supposed to police who goes into what bathroom if you can't tell who you're looking at? So that probably plays a role. But I've also noticed over the past decade or so, a lot of convention centers or the convention themselves have been designating certain bathrooms as gender-neutral bathrooms, placing signs over the original gendered signs. So there is that. But outside of gender acceptance, discussions on racism in fan communities and in my local communities, efforts to uplift and welcome Black fans have definitely been popping up a lot more. Growing up, some of my Black friends were considered not Black enough by their families or their peers for their interest in anime. And now other Black anime fans are creating very visible communities because these people aren't alone, nor are they less Black for their interests, whatever that means. And there's been more and more meetups and panels focused on creating a space for Black fans and discussing Blackness in anime. Literally at MomoCon this year, someone hosted an academic panel on JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and how Black music and culture influenced and shows up in JoJo's. Anime fan communities are as diverse as the population they're fostered in. And we've been seeing this effort to make nerd spaces more inclusive as a way to counteract the awful people who spread hate and racism towards Black fans and cosplayers. People were also starting to have more conversations around bad behavior in general at conventions. With the Me Too movement happening in the mid to late 2010s, I think? Definitely 2010s. There was a lot more awareness of harassment cosplayers specifically had been put through, and a general cultural shift in the understanding of consent and sexual harassment did lead to the Cosplays Not Consent movement. People do still get harassed, and there are definitely still weirdos out there, but there seems to be more public awareness of this sort of behavior. And with social media, it's easier now than ever to warn your local communities of weirdos and creeps at cons, sharing names and faces of those who have been actively harassing people or worse. Now, I don't know if people had this same sense of protecting community prior to social media because I wasn't old enough to go to cons back then, nor did I know cons existed back then. But it is something that I've noticed come up more with social media, especially with Instagram stories and the add yours mechanic, making it so much easier to share and spread information in local communities or like online. But bad behavior isn't just sexual harassment. The average convention attendee did learn to not treat cosplayers like a sideshow or the actual characters they were cosplaying, which is nice. I have heard stories of CL from Black Butler cosplayers getting harassed as people tried to essentially roleplay with them and would do things like pull them into panels or games to make them smile because CL is a kid with depression. Mind you, these were strangers. And there's also the whole yaoi paddle thing with stories of people cosplaying either from BLs or popular male-male ships being hit by strangers with a wooden paddle. I personally can't verify if these stories are true. All of my friends that were going to cons during the yaoi paddle era did not witness anything like this, but I know many of us believed these stories, which I think speaks a lot for what kind of behavior was normalized or stereotypical of anime conventions in the 2000s. I do know glomping was a thing, which is where people basically run up and like hug each other, but they were doing this to strangers or like people cosplaying characters they liked. All this is not to say that you don't still have people at cons who don't know how to act. In fact, I'd argue it's pretty likely you'd come across someone now that treats congoers and cosplayers as freaks. People looking to post online to make fun of enthusiastic fans mostly, or just people who don't realize or don't care that they're being rude. And this has become a little bit more common after COVID as conventions have gone more mainstream, and it's something that most people know about now and not just people who are already in the niche know about. But overall, I would say it's generally become a lot easier to spot a regular person who doesn't go to cons because they're the ones taking pictures and video of everyone without asking first, which is a big no-no in the convention space. Or putting the camera in people's faces directly and calling them weird and walking away. This did happen to a friend of mine at Atlanta Comic-Con in 2019, and certain conventions are worse about attracting this kind of crowd than others. As for convention programming itself, for the most part, it has stayed the same on paper over the years, but to get more specific, I have noticed a little bit of a change in the kinds of panels people are hosting at conventions. During the 2010s, a lot of people would host in-character panels, Q&As, game shows, basically just a panel where you would essentially roleplay with cosplayers pretending to be the character they're dressed up as. They seemed really popular in the 2010s. There are so many YouTube videos of these sorts of panels from this time period, but by the time I started going to anime conventions in 2016, they were kind of already on their way out. You would see a few every once in a while, or a couple at every convention that would be things like murder mystery parties, game shows, sleepover events. Very, very little did I see any in-character Q&As, and I even had a friend group try to do one, and it did get denied. It's definitely something that was very early 2010s, maybe mid 2010s, but by like 2017, 2018, a dying breed. And you never see them now. At most, one of the people that hosts the Black Butler trivia panels at the conventions in Atlanta, when they do host them, they host them in character, which is really cute, but it's never advertised as an in-character panel. It's just a little fun extra thing that the host decides to do. For the most part though, informational yapping sessions, theory panels, cultural discussions, interactive game panels, and watch party panels are still present, and always have been, from what I can tell. There's just a hell of a lot more of them at these bigger conventions. And then, of course, you're always gonna have a shift in what these panels are about specifically. Like, you would be hard-pressed now to find a panel about Haruhi Suzumiya, or just like Lucky Star, or anything that was popular 20 years ago. And what is popular now, you're probably going to be hard-pressed to find a panel about in another 20 years. The general trends of animes that people are talking about don't stay the same, but the actual content itself does, if that makes sense. There's been a lot more people trying to do analytical things, and these analytical panels have always existed. They just seem to be more popular now. So I guess the trends are changing, and that's fine. And I don't know if these sorts of panels are still going to be the main kind of thing a decade from now, but I'm going to enjoy it while it lasts. But despite certain trending things changing, I can honestly say the meat and potatoes of an anime convention and programming and panels haven't changed all that much. You still have industry panels of voice actors talking about their experiences voice acting. You'll have fans discussing something in a very in-depth way. You'll have theory panels. Game shows? People love game shows. Panels that are basically an interactive game or watching people play a game like Guess Who, they're really fun. And I think these game panels have existed for a long time because they're something that's relatively easy to put together, really engaging, and super fun to participate in. And they always will be. So with that in mind, on paper, not much about anime conventions have changed aside from the price and of course the amount of people going. The changes felt mostly lie within the attendees. Most cultural changes are either positive, as we welcome more people into the community, or reflective of greater shifts in our society. A lot about the world has changed. You don't need me to tell you that. In the US specifically, there's been a lot of political issues as things become polarized and human rights demonized, which paint the greater landscape that these anime conventions are happening in. People have also grown more individualistic, making it harder to build community. But at the end of the day, most of us still crave that sense of belonging. We still desire community despite also desiring to be individuals. So it makes sense that anime conventions have exploded over the past 6 years. A lot of people got into anime and manga for the first time during COVID lockdowns. We've all watched anime and manga become very mainstream over the past few years, or at least I saw a TikTok on this literally last night. It was somebody talking about how anime in general, while popular, isn't really what's mainstream in the US. It's very specific popular animes like Demon Slayer or My Hero Academia that are mainstream. And I thought that was really interesting, but to me, I think that also just acts as a really good gateway. Like, if you really liked those shows, the likelihood of you checking out other shows similar to it, pretty high. So, it is interesting. But either way, that still broadens the community of people going to anime conventions. There's a lot of people going to anime conventions for Demon Slayer and My Hero Academia. New people going to cons is going to reshape the community. It's probably part of why the community has felt like it's changed even a decade ago, because as people grow up and start going to cons, or maybe even, God forbid, age out, the people going are not the same people from year to year. While there is going to be a lot of the same people, there's always going to be something new coming in. So that is going to reshape things, and that's always going to be true. But we've also forgotten how to act in public. I see people say this a lot about most community-driven events like concerts and even movie theaters since the world opened back up post-lockdown. I have not really studied sociology. I'm not smart enough to tell you why this has happened. I just know that it has. It's something that we've all noticed. Things have changed, and it's not exclusive to anime conventions, but it is impacting anime conventions for sure. But what once was there isn't lost. Sure, people new to the community do have to learn con etiquette. There might be a little bit of a learning curve as people get used to interacting again and learning how to behave in public. Also, con etiquette is getting a little bit harder to teach because there are content creators who build audiences based on content that is inherently disruptive, disrespectful, and setting a bad example. I'm not gonna name names, but there's a content creator that goes to conventions in the state of Georgia who is very infamous for recording people without their consent, vandalism, all sorts of things that is an absolute this is not how you should act at conventions, but because they are popular online, younger, more impressionable people think that's okay to do because they've gotten a lot of love and popularity from acting a fool, basically. But this is not representative of all who are new to the community, and kids can be taught. Just because you're taught poorly once doesn't mean you can't learn better. But aside from the actual people going to conventions, it should be mentioned that once anime conventions blew up, people realized that there is in fact a lot of money in this industry. And that's where corporate cons really come onto the scene. Up until semi-recently, I think most anime conventions were organized and put on by passionate fans who also just so happen to know how to do all this and have the means to do this. These passion projects had a soul and an understanding of the wants and needs of the community that corporate cons lack, because a corporation cannot be a member of the community, but these passionate individuals putting on conventions were part of the community. I don't think my local conventions are corporate cons, but I do know the people in charge grew up going to conventions. They're a part of the community that they now seek to serve. And you don't really have that with corporations putting on conventions. If you don't know what I'm talking about, these are conventions that are owned by a parent company, and they're clearly in it for the money. There's a focus on guests to draw in crowds with very little programming to back it up. My friends like to call these celebrity pony shows. These sorts of conventions also may mistreat the community with shady business practices that screw over vendors, artists, and attendees, poor accessibility for those with disabilities, and a disregard for cosplay and poorly run contests. These conventions can also usually be pretty pricey for what they are. You are not getting your money's worth out of these cons. I think we can all agree leeches looking to make as much money as possible through conventions are bad, and that's gotta be the worst way conventions have changed, in my opinion. But not all new conventions are exploitative and greedy. The biggest change in anime conventions over the past few decades is their sheer size and scope. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people gathering together for a weekend to celebrate shared interests. With these larger crowds comes more expensive venues that can house the sheer amount of people attending. Some conventions, like Anime Weekend Atlanta, will even host Japanese musicians for mini concerts that are included in the price of your badge.
A lot, like when they get bigger, you get more access to things that, you can't get when you're at a smaller con.
So it feels like you get more bang for your buck, because I also know concerts are very expensive. But the growing price of conventions is absolutely pricing people out of their hobbies. For example, MomoCon 2027, at its cheapest, early bird pricing will cost you about $80, fees and all. Sure, this is for a full weekend, Thursday through Sunday, but that is more expensive than MomoCon used to cost at its most expensive before COVID. Context, a lot of conventions will do early bird pricing where the earlier you buy your ticket, the cheaper it is, and the closer you wait to the convention, the more expensive it gets. So that's what I mean by that. But I remember MomoCon and AWA being like $60 at their most expensive, and that felt fine to me, but I know things used to be cheaper as well when things were not held at giant convention centers. I'm not sure how much of this price increase is the growth in crowds, because MomoCon specifically is renting out a lot more space than it used to. And how much of this price increase is inflation in the economy? It's absolutely both. It's just something that has negatively impacted the community because people don't have money. And if they do have money, well, good for them, I guess. But it's a lot of money to drop, especially if you're also having to pay for hotel and parking. When I first started going to conventions, parking was free. There are still cheaper, smaller conventions, though these may be harder to come by depending on where you live and how far you're willing to drive. Many small conventions did die after COVID. Atlanta's only small anime convention, SeishuCon, did not come back post-lockdown, and that was like $20 for a whole weekend, held at a hotel, in 2019. I was really excited to start going to that con once I moved within relative driving distance, where it would have been reasonable to just drive up every day. But in other areas, small local conventions have either popped up or built upon what they already had with these newfound popularity. These smaller local cons are leagues cheaper to attend and retain a lot of that small community feel that many older con-goers seem to miss. You can also still find glimpses of this tight-knit community of yesteryear's conventions or tiny local cons in fandom-specific meetups, panels, friends made via a shared nicher interest than just anime and manga at large. It might take more than just showing up to the convention now, but the effort is worth it. I know if I go to a panel at my local anime conventions about Takarazuka Review or vintage shoujo, there's this very strong overlap of old interest, vintage interest, maybe even pretentious interest, depending on who you're talking to, that I know for a fact, if I go to these panels, I'm gonna run into the same group of friends that I made at one of these panels, and we never have to meet up intentionally. I just know I'm gonna run into them there. For example, I met a group of people at a Takarazuka Review panel at AWA this past year, thought they were great, ran into them again at MomoCon at a Year 24 group panel, and as I walked to that panel, I said, how much you want to bet these people are going to be there? They seem like they would like this. Lo and behold, they were there. I also see the same people at pretty much every Black Butler panel I go to at conventions. Older, larger conventions are having growing pains right now as they adjust to new locations and new crowds, but I think over time, these growing pains will give way to a thriving community, even if it doubles the size it once was. Anime conventions have changed, and that's okay. Recently, I've heard it be said that anime conventions are going to become like Coachella, where it starts as one thing and then eventually turns into an influencer zoo, where influencers go just to make content and post about being there. While I think it is productive to talk about the negative changes within the convention scene, I don't think people having fun making TikToks and other social media content is ruining conventions. I mean, Katsucon, for years, was the convention you went to if you wanted your cosplay to go viral. And I've never been to Katsucon, but it seems like it's still running strong as an anime convention and not an influencer petting zoo. Although there is something to be said for the fact that Katsucon programming is very much stuck in the past and there's not a lot to do at night. And conventions nowadays, or at least the ones I go to, have a very, very strong nightlife. Instead of becoming Coachella, I think this is a natural evolution, and one that isn't unique to post-COVID lockdown anime conventions. People love documenting their time at cons. People love getting nice pictures of their costumes. People love to make a silly video. And we all love the attention that can come from posting these things online and connecting with others who have similar interests. And that's been true for anime conventions for a very long time now. I don't think anime conventions will lose their spark to become an influencer petting zoo, because the vast majority of what you do at a convention is deeper than that. All these people making content at cons still have a stake in the community. They're engaging with the convention beyond a backdrop to their content, and the content they do make tends to revolve around anime, conventions, and cosplay, the very things that anime conventions are here to celebrate. I've never been to Coachella, but I think the online content people make at conventions, being more than outfit posts and OMG look where I'm at, will save conventions from the fate of being nothing more than an influencer zoo. As more people come into a community, aspects of that community will change. We all bring something unique to the table. Also, our culture in general isn't the same now as it was 20 years ago. Things change, things adapt, and while conventions are no longer the small community they once were, painted in the backdrop of 90s and early 2000s American culture, you can still find that con family in more specific bubbles, and 2010s, 2020s, the current culture of the US painting the backdrop of conventions, while it changes how things might feel, it doesn't ruin the convention space. Sure, things are different, but conventions are still a very welcoming and safe space, for me at least. I can't speak for everyone that goes to cons, but I do know I've always had a very comfortable time there. I've always was able to connect with people that were like-minded, that were generally really good to be around. And I'm saying that like as about this past convention I went to. Like, I'm not reminiscing 10 years ago, I'm talking about 3 weeks ago. As for finding that more specific con family, going to specific fan meetups, making friends at panels, and attending smaller, more local events will provide that same sense of community that was once found at your average niche anime convention in the 2000s. If you live in a larger city or near a larger city, look and see if there are people organizing more specific meetups. I know people are doing cup sleeve events for different gacha games and animes, and I do know there is a group in Atlanta specifically that hosts a lot of BL and Yuri meetups throughout the year, not just at anime conventions, but like going to get boba tea and meeting up and things like that. Little smaller things. And sometimes these larger conventions will host one-day events throughout the year. I know MomoCon specifically hosts cosplayers on ice, and it's like not a random Saturday, but it's a Saturday in December or January, I think it's January, where they rent out an ice skating rink in the middle of Atlanta and cosplayers go, and they do little things like that. And things like that are going to be more local. You're not going to get the people who travel from other states or like across the country or the globe to go to these bigger cons at these smaller events put on by the same bigger cons. It might take more effort to find these things, but it's definitely worth it if you are able to find them and attend them. Looking towards more specific interests within the broader interests of anime will absolutely lead you to the tight-knit community many older con-goers talk about missing. And going to these smaller one-day events put on by bigger cons, or maybe even finding that local gem of an anime convention that's not very big, maybe not even that old. There's still a sense of belonging out there, and anime conventions are still a wonderful hub, despite and because of all the ways things have changed for the broader community. I don't think change is a bad thing, even if it's something I personally struggle with. I have only fallen deeper in love with anime conventions as I've been going more and more over these past few years, and while it's definitely not the same convention I went to in 2016, the conventions I'm going to in 2026 still feel good. They still hit that same itch for me, and I think anyone could still find that out there. It just might take a little bit extra effort than it used to. I hope this video made sense. I really like to talk about conventions. I think convention history is fascinating, and I also am deeply interested in the conversations that people have been having about anime conventions and the culture post-COVID lockdowns. Because, yeah, it is different. But I only ever see people complaining about it, and I don't think it's always worth complaining about. Or maybe not worth, but it's not always something to complain about. Yeah, I'm gonna complain about the crowds and the prices, but I don't think people who are getting into this now should be excluded from going to conventions because I want to have a more comfortable, less crowded experience. That's not fair. I too was once a new person going to cons, adding to crowding. I'm still adding to the crowding by being there. If you're interested in convention history, a lot of the actual historical things I sourced specifically from this one panel that I'm linking down below, that I found online about convention history at large, like not just anime conventions. And then I also found this blog about Star Blazers, and that was what I was really using to talk about the Star Blazers convention from like the 80s. So I'll put both of those down in the description. They're really interesting to look into. Other than that, this is the video I made instead of doing a convention vlog for MomoCon. I might continue vlogging conventions in the future. I know those videos don't typically do well, but I still enjoy making them, and my friends enjoy watching them. So I'll probably get back to that later, because I really missed not having a vlog to edit after MomoCon this year. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking it, talking to me about it. What do you think? Let me know what you think in the comments. I want to know. But anyway, I make a lot of videos about anime and fandom and just things like that. So if you're interested in any of that, consider sticking around. But that is it for me. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video, whatever that may be. Goodbye!